Texas is grieving right now. The pain, the shock of what has transpired these last few days has broken the heart of our state. As of yesterday, the confirmed death toll was 82, and those numbers are continuing to go up. The children, the little girls who were lost at Camp Mystic, that's every parent's nightmare. Every mom and dad. Last week, we were picking up our daughter from camp here in Hunt. Our girls have gone to camp here for a decade. The Hill Country is an incredible part of Texas, part of the country. The natural beauty here is incredible. The camps that have raised generations of little girls and little boys and instilled character and love and faith are extraordinary institutions. And I'll tell you, the pain in our state, and it's every part of the state. You've got Texans from all over the state who were here celebrating the 4th of July. A week ago, this was a time of great celebration. You're dropping your little girl off at camp, your little boy off at camp. You're celebrating Independence Day. You know that your child is going to be swimming and canoes and horseback riding and doing archery and making lifetime friends. And then suddenly it turns to tragedy. For the last several days, I've spoken to multiple parents, scared out of their mind. Do you know anything? Where is my daughter? There's still 10 girls and 1 counselor from Camp Mystic that are unaccounted for. And the pain and agony of not knowing your child's whereabouts, it's the worst thing imaginable. But I want to say, in the face of all of this, it is simultaneously inspiring. Every time there's a tragedy, every time there's a natural disaster in Texas, Texans come together. Texas is a big state. We've got 31 million people, and we have hurricanes, we have tornadoes, we have wildfires. Tragedies hit this state, natural disasters hit this state, and without fail, 100 out of 100 times when that happens, we see Texans coming together, helping each other, engaging in acts of heroism. There have been over 850 high water rescues since this flooding began. 850. You look at extraordinary stories of Eagle Scouts pulling campers out of harm's way. I was just hearing a story of one counselor whose head was right at the water holding up 2 mattresses with campers on those mattresses. That kind of courage, that kind of selflessness. And then there are the first responders. The local first responders, I want to thank every one of the first responders at the local level, at the city level, at the county level, at the state level, at the federal level. In the first few hours of this flood, I was on the phone with Governor Abbott, I was on the phone with Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, I was on the phone with Nim Kidd, the head of the Texas Department of Emergency Management, and then I called President Trump. I called President Trump. He was having dinner at the time. It was still early in what was transpiring. And I wanted him to know, I said, Mr. President, everything we're hearing right now, this appears to be bad, really bad. There may be a very significant loss of life unfolding right now in Texas. And I will tell you, the President said, Ted, anything Texas needs, the answer is yes. Whatever assets you need, whatever resources you need, yes, let us know, and we will provide everything. Within hours, we had helicopters, over a dozen helicopters in the air. National Guard, DPS, game wardens, Coast Guard, doing search and rescue, reaching down. We've all seen the videos of little girls being pulled up, hoisted out of harm's way. Incredible courage and heroism. Search and rescue is the first stage. But the process of coming together and rebuilding is going to take longer. And I will say to all the grieving families, to all of those who've gotten the worst news imaginable, that your little girl, she's gone. I will say for many of us, those are friends and neighbors who've lost children. Got multiple kids who go to school with my girls. The mayor asked for prayers. And I want to say thank you to the millions of Texans, to the millions of Americans, to the millions of people all over the world right now who are praying for Texas and praying for those parents. Going through this grief, it is going to take love, it is going to take friends and family embracing and hugging and holding them while they weep. And it's going to take the church. With every disaster, one of the things we see here in Texas is the church steps up and the church helps and the church feeds and clothes and comforts. This morning I met with a group of chaplains who've been going through the incredibly difficult process of talking to mom and dad after mom and dad who just lost the most precious person they ever knew. And those chaplains are just trying to love them and show God's love. So I want to say we will come through this. To those in the midst of grief right now, that might seem hard to fathom. But Texas will come through this. And I just want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to these gentlemen here who are working. They are not sleeping. They are working every day. Thank you to the families. Thank you to the Salvation Army. Thank you to everyone who is just reaching out and saying, how can I help? We will come through this, and we'll come through this together. Thank you. And now we'll take questions.
Senator, you talked about how you know kids here, how you've taken your own kids to camp. Was it ever communicated to you that there was a need, that it was a priority to have a warning system so people had a chance to escape something like this?
Well, listen, I think anytime you're dealing with major rivers, there's a risk of flooding, and there's always been a risk of flooding, particularly on the Guadalupe River. I will say, in the wake of every tragedy, there are things that are predictable. One of the things that's predictable is that you see some people engaging in, I think, partisan games and trying to blame their political opponents for a natural disaster. And you see that with a hurricane, with a tornado, with a wildfire, with this flooding, where people immediately say, well, the hurricane is Donald Trump's fault. You know, look, I think most normal Americans know that's ridiculous, and I think this is not a time for partisan finger-pointing and attacks. Now, after we come through search and rescue, after we come through the process of rebuilding, there will naturally be a period of retrospection where you look back and say, okay, what exactly transpired? What was the timeline? And what could have been done differently to prevent this loss of life? And that's a natural process. I think it should not happen in a bitter and partisan sense, but it should happen in a reasonable sense of saying, what lessons can we learn? And I will give an example. You know, Houston's my hometown. If you live on the Gulf Coast, we get hurricanes. That's part of living on the Gulf Coast as hurricanes hit. And I do think Texas as a whole has learned over time how to deal more effectively with hurricanes. And so you look here, we know the National Weather Service put out an emergency warning just after 1 a.m. and a second emergency warning just after 4 a.m. Now, obviously, most people at 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. are asleep. And so I think we will have a reasonable conversation about, are there any ways to have earlier detection? And some of that, the limits of a flash flood, they're very difficult because they can arise so quickly. But everyone would agree in hindsight, if we could go back and do it again, we would evacuate particularly those in the most vulnerable areas, the young children in the cabins closest to the water. We would remove them and get them to higher ground if we could go back and do it again. Obviously, everyone would. The people in RVs by the river's edge. We know in disasters like this, RVs and mobile homes are particularly susceptible, whether a flood or a hurricane or a tornado, they're particularly susceptible to that. And so my hope is, in time, we will learn some lessons to implement to next time, and there will be another flood, there will be another disaster, But next time there's a flood, I hope we have in place processes to remove especially the most vulnerable from harm's way. But I think that's going to be a process that will take a careful examination of what happened and how can we implement processes better in the future to prevent this same loss of life.
Senator, there were claims that the National Weather Service sent that first flash flood warning that should have alerted phones at 1:14 in the morning. But we have a federal public database maintained by PBS Warn, that says the first emergency alert wirelessly here in this area to Kerr County was not until after 9 a.m. That was more than 4 hours after the severe flooding had come to this area. Did you know that? Have you seen that? And what's your response, knowing the state and cuts to the NWS in recent months by this administration?
So I don't know the source for what you're saying. All of the public reporting I've seen is that there were two alerts that went out, one just after 1 a.m., one after 4 a.m. You know, I can tell you, I talked about the partisan finger pointing. I think there have been some eager to point at the National Weather Service and say cuts there led to a lack of warning. I think that's contradicted by the facts. And if you look at the facts in particular, number one, that these warnings went out hours before the flood became a true emergency level. But number two, the National Weather Service here, New Braunfels is where they were headquartered. They had additional manpower. In fact, they had 3 additional people working that night, anticipating that it was going to be a very dangerous weather situation. I also think it's worth noting that the National Weather Service Union, which has been very critical of the DOGE cuts, has publicly said that they don't believe that the reduction in staffing had any impact whatsoever on their ability to warn of this event. And so, look, I think it is reasonable over time to engage in a retrospective and say at every level what could have been done better, because all of us would want to prevent this horrific loss of life. But I think just immediately trying to use it for either side to attack their political opponents, I think that's cynical and not the right approach, particularly at a time when we're dealing with a crisis and we're dealing with grief.
But does this make you question whether there should be cuts at the National Weather Service and FEMA? I know you've been supportive of FEMA.
Look, I am very supportive of FEMA. I'm very supportive of the National Weather Service. They both perform essential roles, and I think it is critical at every federal agency, particularly when you're dealing with public safety, that we make sure that critical roles are maintained. That's a longer and broader discussion, but as I said, everything from the public evidence indicates that was not a contributing factor to what occurred here.
Not to get into the weeds on, people are asking lots of questions, and where should we start the investigation?
To the best of my knowledge, there is zero evidence of anything related to anything like weather modification. And look, the internet can be a strange place. People can come up with all sorts of crazy theories. What I know is a reality is that a whole lot of Texans are grieving right now. I will tell you, I was visiting with one parent who was talking about online being harassed online because their information was public that they had a little girl who was missing at Mystic. And look, there are a lot of people who are messed up, and my call for everyone, there's a time to have political fights, there's a time to disagree. This is not that time. This is a time just to reach out, support each other, go volunteer at the Salvation Army, give them money, go volunteer at your church, go. You know what I did when this happened? Just go hug your kids, because I got to tell you, I hugged my girls with tears in my eyes, because every one of us who's a parent, there but for the grace of God go I, and nothing will fill the void in these moms and dads' hearts, but they'll make it through it. And every one of us, we have an obligation to come through and help them make it through it. And look, Texas will come through, and let me say, Kerr County, the Hill Country is incredible. It is beautiful. And these summer camps, Camp Mystic is an incredible Texas institution. For a century, it has made a profound difference helping young girls become strong women in Texas and across the country. And so, for me at least, I'm praying for these camps. I'm praying for all the campers, everyone implicated, everyone impacted, and I hope we come together and stand as one doing that.
Thank you.